In the August Wilson play Fences, his friend Bono tells Troy that he's got more stories than the devil has sinners. And Troy, the character who was played by the film star Denzel Washington, when I had occasion to see the play when it appeared on Broadway in 2010, said he'd actually seen him too, a word that appears at least 22 times in that play, most often from the main character Troy, even telling his son Lyons, "I'll die and go to hell and play blackjack with the devil before I give you $10. And he had convinced his son that he had actually seen the devil himself. But Troy's wife, played by Viola Davis in that Broadway production, says, "You ain't seen no devil. I done told you that man ain't had nothing to do with the devil. Anything you can't understand, you just want to call it the devil." And in black culture, which Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger had described in a letter to a physician, Dr. C.J. Gamble, in 1939, described as ignorant, superstitious, and confused. Rose's remarks about her husband, Troy, may hold some credence even in the 1950s, in which the play setting took place for the members of Ralph Northam's church and the black church where President Joe Biden grew up. Because in that demographic of that time, when 11 o'clock was the most segregated hour in America, even the U.S. Supreme Court had acknowledged that the segregated schools in which my grandmother had taught, and which the county of Arlington had refused to erect a sufficient number, were not equal facilities, depriving that demographic of a quality education that it had expressed as perhaps the most important function of state and local government, and psychologically with some impacts on a feeling of inferiority. So Rose's statement that anything you can't understand, you want to call it the devil, even finds support in a common phrase of frustration amongst many older African Americans who might be heard to say after they misplace some particular item, "Devil, take your hands off my whatever has been physically lost," similar to the Roman Catholic culture that might cover a statue of St. Anthony, the patron saint of lost things, until that item is found. And what may be dismissed as superstition amongst the more educated by credentials is nonetheless a reality to them, very difficult, if not impossible, to disabuse. Rose, who is depicted stereotypically as a deeply spiritual woman like Petunia, played by Ethel Waters in the Vincent Minnelli Faustian legend film Cabin in the Sky, is convinced that her husband, Troy, will one day face God's judgment for his dealings with the devil. But even his mentally challenged brother Gabriel, named for the angel, has his own thoughts about this Lord of the Dark, saying that the devil is strong, the devil ain't no pushover, hellhound snipping at everybody's heels, but I got my trumpet waiting on the judgment time. And this theme of the devil features especially for the main character Troy, very prominently throughout the entire play, along with a day of judgment, which features very prominently throughout the entire play, particularly at the conclusion, where Troy's brother Gabriel is transformed on the stage into this angelic character of legend, blowing his mighty horn, which throughout the entire play before made only an inaudible sound to others who could not hear. It is intriguing that August Wilson had decided to name his main character Troy, the ancient city that Herodotus in his histories connects to the legend of Helen and the Phoenicians, and recounted by the poet Homer as the face that launched 1,000 ships taken from her native land, which may find some connection to an African-American culture. In a rather lengthy dialogue, Troy describes a deal that he had made with the devil, an installment credit agreement, upon which he had been overpaying in interest for his entire life because of something that he wanted so much at the time. And there are enough details in the play to associate this thing he can't understand as a white man, like the one for whom he worked as a garbage truck driver. And this theme of the white man devil and deal maker resonates throughout an African American culture, very prominent in the teachings of the Prophet Elijah Muhammad of Chicago, who had decided at a very convenient time to even ordain the prize fighter known to the courts as Cassius Clay. It reverberates in some of the earlier speeches of Minister Malcolm X, formerly Malcolm Little, getting rid of his slave name, and can still be heard in the preachings of Minister Louis Farrakhan in the Nation of Islam, or Black Muslims, a religious sect from which both Muhammad Ali and some others later departed to embrace the Islamic faith that Malcolm X had encountered on his first pilgrimage to Mecca. But this dark world figure finds another nature revealed in a dialogue by Troy in the play Fences by August Wilson, when he talks about his own father and says that he never knew why the devil never came to get him until the day that he finally realized that his father was the devil himself, subtly suggesting that his real daddy, to use the popular phrase, was one of those people who ain't really black. But in The Inmate, Robert Cardew, returning to that, had encountered his man at the crossroads around Christmas time, a holiday season, and he claimed that he had attempted to provoke him so much that after successive formal complaints, using the proper procedures, he found himself in a federal court, where, as we learned in the last segment, that old devil was still yet determined to even present arguments to defend himself that had absolutely positively no foundation in law, thinking that he could somehow slip by, raising the sincerity of his faith belief as a reason for the court to dismiss his case, which any attorney knows is not permitted. But how did Robert Cardew's devilish encounter turn out on that judgment day? According to the court summary of the events, plaintiff claimed that defendants violated his First Amendment rights under the Free Exercise Clause when they refused to allow him to attend Jehovah's Witness religious services, which is a rather developed argument for an inmate in prison who did not have an attorney, and far more developed than even the complaint that had been brought by the high-powered Midtown Manhattan firm of Paul Weiss, that had been somehow retained by Mujahid Farid, where the court was compelled to employ a liberal construction to their inartful pleadings. But, citing to that prior case, that same prior case of Farid, with his tarot cards, the court wrote, in determining whether there is a violation of the Free Exercise Clause, courts must assess, 1, whether the practice asserted is religious in the person's scheme of beliefs, and whether the belief is sincerely held. 2, whether the challenged practice of prison officials infringes upon the religious belief. And 3, whether the challenged practice of the prison officials furthers some legitimate penological objective. And in court, it is not the parties, but the precedents that are most important because of their enduring impacts upon the law that affects others who come thereafter under the law. Accepting all allegations as true, the court acknowledged that Robert Cardew had claimed that he was prohibited from attending Jehovah's Witness services unless he pledged allegiance to the Jehovah's Witness religion. The court acknowledged that Robert Cardew had claimed that inmates were not required to pledge allegiance to other religions in order to attend their services. And the court heard the arguments of the defendants, who claimed that, pursuant to DOCS Directive 4202, plaintiff would be allowed to attend the Jehovah's Witness services if he merely were to complete a religious designation form. And that plaintiff's claim mischaracterizes and distorts DOCS policy. The court noted that defendants do not argue that requiring an inmate to pledge allegiance to a particular religion is not a constitutional violation, which is a turning point in this case because the court noticed that even though the defendants had claimed that it was Robert Cardew who had been distorting all the facts and misstating all the facts, casting the blame on him, they never denied that they had in fact intended to compel him to complete a religious pledge. And the opinion states, therefore, the court will assume, without deciding that such a requirement would violate the First Amendment, And citing to the Supreme Court decision in Tarasco v. Watkins, with which most should be familiar if they followed the law, a 1961 case that arose in Maryland when a notary who was an atheist had been compelled to sign a religious oath in a state in which those who did not profess to believe in God were barred from holding public offices, which included notary. That decision had stated, we repeat, and again reaffirm, that neither a state nor the federal government can constitutionally force a person to profess a belief or disbelief in any religion. And construing these facts as Robert Cardew had alleged them in his amateur complaint, prepared with no attorney assistance, the court denied defendant's motion to dismiss this claim with only the footnote reference for authority that stated that the claims of his insincerity were questions of fact that were not ripe for argument at that time or stage in litigation. What happened after that fact, the court does not go into. But on that day, Robert Cardew prevailed because his sincerity and religious belief could not be questioned in a motion to dismiss. And with this foundation, the next installment of this Deal with the Devil video series, we shall endeavor to apply these lessons to the facts presented to the hospital workers and the demands of their employer, the Conway Regional Health System in Arkansas, some of whom may even be Jehovah's Witnesses, who by devotional religious practice are prohibited from making any pledge of allegiance in any form. Perhaps some folks require a little sensitivity training for their education rather than running around trying to find 30 medications that their employees cannot take to test their sincerity. So until next time, recall that as Paul writes in his epistle to the early church at Ephesus, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. To those in faith, behold, for you are sent forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be ye therefore wise as serpents, and harmless as doves. And I charge thee therefore in season and out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and doctrine. For a time has come when they do not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lusts they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears. And they turn away their ears from the truth, and are turned unto fables that they profess to believe. But watch thou in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of an evangelist, make full proof of thy ministry. Live long and prosper, star voyagers. This briefing is unclassified, as you were. My name is Major Mike Webb, and by God, I am running for Arlington Public School Board, at least in pretext. Let's keep Mike Webb away from our schools. Honest, carry on. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.
I used to be a Power Ranger in a former life.
Funk, I could have had a vaccine.